thought I should really talk about how SWOP got its name. And, it's a story I've told before. One day, Robin comes up to me and she goes, Maxine, I want to start an organization for sex workers. And I was like, cool, go for it, And this was probably about 2005-ish, something like that. It was after she had done Measure Q in Berkeley. And I'm like, well, isn't there already like a sex worker group? She's like, no, I want one just for sex workers, but I don't know what to name it. And I was like, well, I don't know. What do you want the group to do? She's like, I don't know. I'm just trying to think of a name. And I was like, well, the only name I know of a sex worker group is the Sex Worker Outreach Project in Australia. And she's like, that's it. I'll call it the Sex Worker Outreach Project. I was like, well, that group in Australia, they do outreach to people in the sex industry for HIV prevention and treatment. And so maybe you should get a hold of them and ask them if it's okay to use their name. And, are you planning on doing some outreach? She's like, well, I don't know, but that's a great name. And she's like, well, how do I get a hold of them? And I'm like, well, Rachel W., she was the outreach person for SWOP Australia. She was an outreach worker, and she's been over here to the United States several times. So you should, you know her. She's like, oh, yeah, she knew her because they had worked together, right? And so she did. She contacted Rachel, and Rachel, talked to SWOP Australia, and they were like, yeah, whatever, go for it, And so that's how SWOP got its name.
Interesting.
So she had asked me, to join SWOP, but, as they had developed as a group, I wasn't really, in affinity with their mission statement, with the mission statement they had come up with. I had already started Erotic Service Providers Union because I really believed that people, need to be at the center of their own advocacy for their own work conditions and their own labor and their own economy. And so, I felt pretty solid about that. And so, yeah, that's kind of how it all started.
Interesting. Well, I'm curious personally, I'm curious how you knew Robin. I mean, you guys spent time together, quite a bit of time together.
Yes. Well, the first time I met Robin was in probably about 2002, I think, or 2003. And she had come on the scene at some sort of, day-long or weekend-long sort of sex worker symposium that I think Carol had put together. And so here was this woman who was screaming at the top of her lungs that she had been arrested and wasn't that an indignity and people shouldn't be charged with prostitution and la, 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 la. And I just was like, welcome to the real world. And then I realized that I had talked to Robin on the phone, that she had taken over what had been Sheila Ash's book. So Sheila Ash is still a longtime madam in San Francisco. She has her own like a bed and breakfast where she would send a car to go pick up customers and bring them to her location. And so Sheila was one of the circuit madams back in the day. There was a big circuit where each city had one or two women that acted in the capacity as a madam who hosted workers to come in and see customers. And so Robin had taken over Sheila's book because Sheila had gotten busted in San Francisco. The district attorney, Terrence Hallinan, had gone in and arrested her and taken like $65,000 off of her, just kind of, cut a deal with her like in the middle of the night in front of a judge, that she would hand over the cash that she would cease and desist, but that she got to keep her, her B&B. And so Sheila was in a situation where she wanted to sell her book. Robin had already been working for her. And so Robin had, bought her book and was operating and was hosting. And so that's how I knew that she knew, Rachel. I knew that she had hosted and a bunch of our other, mutual friends from back in that era. And so Robin had sold her book. And because there was a bunch of rumors that were coming that the circuit was going to, be going, that was under surveillance and that it was going to go down. And this was right before 9/11, actually. This was like that whole fall or spring and summer before, and so there was this big rumor mill, about the circuit was going to go down and it was under surveillance. And so Robin had sold her book to this other girl who had no connection to the business at all. She was just, I don't know where Robin found her, but, whatever. So she sells her book, and Robin goes off with Michael, and they're growing in Sonoma County. And so they do take the circuit down, and there is a warrant out for Robin's arrest. And finally the police catch up with her like a year later and charge her with basically the Mann Act, which is, people being transported across state lines for the purposes of. And so all they really had on Robin was this tape recording of her talking to the woman she'd sold the book to about, the other gals coming in from the other circuits, the other circuit houses. And, her discovery was like, it was this thick, thousands of pages of crazy stuff about the FBI saying that, somebody in Florida had, one of the girls on the circuit had seen, Osama bin Laden, as a customer and threat to national security. And that's why they embarked upon this wiretapping, tapping people's phones sort of business to entrap, women into, not entrap, but to record people booking appointments for, with their customers, for, the women, the other escorts that worked on the circuit who went from city to city. Basically their arrangement was that they would spend a week in each location. And so that was kind of the deal back then. And so that's kind of how I heard of Robin first. And then at that symposium where she was screaming her head off because she had been charged, and then I started talking to her and got to look at that 1,000 pages of discovery, and spent a whole long time with her going through that court case that was being, where she was being charged. She was charged in federal court. And because she had come out of the medical marijuana movement, she had a lot of training around being an activist. So she was a good activist. She knew what had to be done in terms of organizing, which was good. And so she was able to turn out a bunch of the marijuana activist people and get a bunch of visibility on her case in federal court. And I think that Carol, too, really helped her with garnering some local media and started to spotlight, what was going on, that people were still being arrested. Because I think in the wake of Margot St. James's good work, that Margot's good work and Margot's message was about, stop arresting people for working. That's just the stupidest thing, to arrest people for working. And the majority of the population, the country was like, yeah, that's dumb. And we should not be arresting people for working as prostitutes because they might be poor people or, might be the only job that they have. Margot was famous for saying, even a blowjob is, a job, to have a job, even if it was a blowjob, was at least it was a job. So, people were kind of shocked. The public was kind of shocked at that time that, people were still being arrested and for, being prosecuted for prostitution-related offenses. So, it was very difficult for Robin and Michael to go through that litigation for a long time. It went on and on. She finally did take a plea, which was good. Good for her because she was able to, to stop, the madness. several of the girls who had turned state's evidence against her, one had committed suicide in the East Bay. I remember that very distinctly. I knew that girl too. It was just really, it was really a horrible thing, to go through and to watch somebody go through that. So yeah.
And that would have been right before she would be getting sick too. I mean, that was just a very hard time, I imagine, and then another hard time.
Yeah, I mean, it was extremely unfortunate that she, got sick. And, I think there's that one picture. Well, I've got a bunch of pictures of her campaigning, for Prop K in San Francisco that we did, 4 years later in 2008. And, yeah.
I would, it'd be awesome if some of this information could eventually make it into, a historical account, so people can read about it and understand, where the origins and the different people, the personalities that were around, you were deeply embedded in that community, and, the different, things that happened at that time. And it makes sense too. What you're saying gives me insight as to why the strategy became to, disguise the anti-prostitution movement as a, save the children movement, because people's attitudes were very much positive about this should be legalized. This should not be something people get arrested for. And that makes, a lot more sense. And who would know but the people who are around during these different time periods, what the attitudes were and so forth.